Today, I'm excited to welcome Kris Kelso to Digital Drive. He is a keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and the author of Overcoming the Imposter. As a trained and certified executive coach, Kris has worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs and business owners across leadership teams all around the world. He has founded multiple companies and has served on boards of directors for several nonprofit organizations. Kris currently lives with his wife and 3 teenage sons in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where we met and became very, very fast friends. I hope you enjoy our conversation today as we hear from Kris all that he's learned about imposter syndrome on his self-discovery to writing the book, Overcoming the Imposter. I hope you enjoy the show. Kris Kelso, how are you?
Hey, Rebecca, I'm doing great. It's so good to be with you again.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks for joining. Great to see you from Nashville.
Yeah.
Yes, we met in Nashville years and years ago. One of my first IT jobs, actually. And
That's
I
right.
always respected you and looked up to you as a very impressive IT consultant. So I
Oh,
wanted
thank
to
you.
start today's conversation just hearing from you about what that journey was like, your first company, and all that you learned as you were
Yeah.
really getting things off the ground.
Yeah. So I was a technologist many years ago. I was a software developer 20 some odd years ago. And when you and I met, I had just gotten started in an IT consulting firm. I was probably a few years in, but I started my first company in 2007, 31 years old, and really had no business experience or training, did not know what I was doing, and never didn't even have a college degree. But I remember buying a stack of books, just going to a bookstore and buying whatever I thought I needed to know, from writing contracts to legal stuff and finances and marketing and sales and how to scope a consulting engagement. And I started an IT consulting firm and grew it over several years to the point that we were doing millions of dollars in revenue. And I had a team of mostly former CIOs and VP level folks, working with all kinds of companies, even up into the Fortune 50, doing some pretty big projects. So it was a fun ride, and I learned a ton along the way.
Yeah, and so did I. I loved how we got to work side by side with some customers, and
Yeah.
it was kind of trial by fire. And I always loved that you didn't let the fact that you didn't have a degree or, these fancy titles really stop you. You've always been one that likes to get in the weeds, get your hands dirty, and help customers. So talk a little bit about just where that came from and really what inspired you to say, hey, I want to be somebody who really knows the ins and outs so that I can be an effective leader by being able to have that dialogue.
My career has always been driven by my curiosity. I get fascinated with certain things, whether it's, technology early on to leadership and business strategy to investing, and how investment decisions are made, and even to things like public speaking and writing a book, and some of the things I've done more recently. It's really a matter of when something really interests me and fascinates me, I will dig in and learn it and learn it not just for myself, but I also love to teach. So I try to learn things well enough that I can actually convey that information to other people.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And then fast forward future now, more and more focus on entrepreneurs and helping them, look
Yeah.
at a business as a whole and talk a little bit about just your approach because now you really interact with those folks in more of an executive coaching capacity. How do you
Yeah.
kind of coach those guys through that experience?
It was a conscious process, and it took a number of years and several different stages, from starting and running a second company, being the CEO there rather than the technologist, learning and working with investors about what they look at in business strategy and investment opportunities, doing some turnaround work, and just sort of working my way to the point that I had both the experience and the relationships and credibility to work with executives. And now my work is primarily with owners and operators of small to medium-sized businesses. I'm usually working with the CEO and occasionally with the entire leadership team, doing executive coaching, leadership development, strategic planning, and really analyzing the organization to make sure that everyone is working against the same plan, speaking the same language, and executing, rowing in the same direction, so that we put all of our energy, all of our force against the priorities of the business and eliminate as many distractions as we can.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I'm curious to hear from you if there's just a view of yourself that had to change when you went from that IT guy to now I'm a leader, I'm an executive, and focus on the C-suite. I think that has to start kind of with you first before you can make an impact on others. What was that like?
It does. And it required me in a number of different ways to get over a degree of imposter syndrome and feeling like I was not worthy or not capable or not qualified. And I've definitely made my share of mistakes. I would never want to paint my picture, my career story, as though I just nailed it every time on the first try of everything I ever tried to do.
You had this thought here that made me think about a way I like to approach life. And that's, you said risk, I say being hungry, being scared. And
Yeah.
not everybody is comfortable in that uncomfortable place. Some
Yeah.
people thrive on it, but you've now discovered it to be what folks call the imposter syndrome. Can you tell us
Yes.
about that discovery process?
Sure. So for anybody who's not familiar, I'll just define really quickly. Imposter syndrome is a psychological term that was coined in the 1970s, and it refers to the tendency of many people, it turns out, to overvalue the accomplishments and the success of other people and really undervalue or even doubt the reality of their own success. And so, what happens is I look at Rebecca and I say, man, she's successful because she's smart and savvy and educated, and she's made all the right moves, and she's, moved from great company to great company and keeps getting promoted and all these things. And my success is, boy, it sure has involved a lot of luck and good timing. And I just happen to know the right people or be in the right place at the right moment. And I know that there's a lot of mistakes that I've made along the way, that my path has certainly not been a straight shot to the top. It's been a zigzag and a lot of backtracking and all of those things. But I don't see that in other people's stories. So often what we see from other people is just the polished, sort of filtered version of their career, of their story. And so it's really easy for us to feel like, man, maybe I'm a little bit of a fraud. Maybe I'm a little bit of an imposter, and I don't really measure up to the people that I see around me. Or some of my success has just been a fluke, and I'm not really quite there yet. And it turns out that up to 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career. And it tends to be more prevalent among high achievers. So the more ambitious you are, the more of an innovator you are, the more you're someone who likes to push the boundaries. Or if you're like me and you're driven by curiosity and wanting to learn new things and try new things, the more likely you are to feel at times like, man, I am in over my head and I really don't know what I'm doing. And I sure hope nobody ever figures that out. Because the underlying fear of imposter syndrome is if someone figures out that I'm just making this up as I go and I really don't quite know what I'm doing, then I'm going to be exposed as a fraud, and it's all going to come crumbling down around me at that point. And you may not feel that quite so overtly, but I think we all have a little bit of that tension, that feeling of, man, I just hope that the jig is not up at some point, and this this string of successes or these things that I've been able to do just come to an end because it wasn't me all this time.
Oh, I think most people can relate with that feeling. Even I've been surprised by people in my career who I see as a mentor or a coach or a guide have moments of that too. So
Yeah,
I totally validate that, fear that people have and the fact that that is a real thing. But I want to hear from you about your book that really is helping people accomplish a way of overcoming that, and really where the inspiration for these tips and tricks have come from.
Yeah. So the book is Overcoming the Imposter.
Awesome.
I wrote it during the pandemic in 2020. I had
Mm-hmm.
a lot of time at home and on a lot of Zoom calls. And so in between there, I started to really document not only my own journey, but the hundreds of interviews and entrepreneurs that I've talked with, met with, specifically about imposter syndrome. So I didn't discover imposter syndrome until just a few years ago. But when I first heard the definition, just like I described it for you, it really resonated. And I realized that I felt that throughout my career at different times. And so I spent a couple of years studying this phenomenon and trying to figure out the secret behind managing it. And, can you kill it? Can you, overcome it once and for all? Does it creep back up? What are the types of situations and scenarios where it really gets a hold of you? And how do you quell those voices, that inner critic, that the voice of the saboteur that's in your head trying to tell you can't make it, you're not going to do it right, it's going to be a failure. One of the things I discovered is that in looking at my career and many of the things that we've talked about, going from technology to leadership to coaching to professional speaking and writing a book, that most of the times that I felt the most insecure, the times that I was, really feeling imposter syndrome creeping up on me, telling me that I'm about to do something wrong, those were the pivotal moments in my career when something great was about to happen.
It's so impressive, and didn't let it stop you at all. It's awesome.
Thank you. And now I get to be on Digital Drive with Rebecca.
There you go. Aren't you lucky?
You see where it can take you when you just take a risk and do the thing you're scared of.
What do you tell those people to just say, hey, get out there and try once and fail? It's not as scary as you think.
Yeah. One of the things that I discovered is that we learn a lot more from failure than we do from success. And in fact, failure is the path to success.
I think it's as simple as you look back to anybody who's ever known a child learning to walk or somebody learning to ride a bike.
That's exactly right.
Just because they fall, just because they crash, you don't tell them to stop, or else they would never actually advance and become a productive human in the society.
And it requires a lot of trial and error, but I think that's the way we're made to learn. I think that just gets beaten out of us at some point, and we feel like I can't do it until I'm certified and I have the stamp of approval to be that expert. But that's not the way it should work.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's absolutely not true. And you even talk in your book about how at one point you were very insecure about not having a degree, and that making you unqualified to be successful as a consultant, as a business owner. But you look now today, they're actually dropping that requirement for most technical jobs. You don't even have to have a degree. And so if you would have sat here and stalled and not started your business, done all the things you've done to get where you are today because you didn't have a degree, you would be laughing at yourself, saying that now you could work, or crying, saying now I could work for Google and Amazon and Microsoft, these huge companies, without an undergrad education.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is the thing that you think is a weakness or that holds you back, oftentimes other people see as a strength. I have had a number of people tell me how impressed they are that I've done what I've done in my career without a college degree.
You had another idea in the book that I really loved, and it was the imposter can turn a typical decision into a difficult one and make a difficult decision nearly impossible. Will you expand a little bit on what you meant by that? I have an idea, but I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, the fear of failure and getting over that fear of failure and recognizing that failure is part of the process of success will make it so much easier to make those decisions and take those risks. But if you fear failure and you're letting that voice tell you that if you make one wrong move, it's going to sink you, it's going to expose you, then you're going to turn every decision into a monumental life or death kind of a decision. And it can really become debilitating if you let it get the better of you.
Yeah, and then even if not debilitating, there was another aspect of this that you highlighted that I think is more where the type A personalities, the drivers fall, and that's productive procrastination. Yes. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that is me.
Did you think I wrote that for you?
Yeah, that one nailed me. But the note I had here was it's working hard on the things that are easy in order to avoid things that you don't want to do. Yeah. How do we get over that?
Man, I see this a lot in entrepreneurs. I see it in technology departments when I was doing IT consulting work. It's finding ways to be busy and truly to be productive, but really the motivation behind what you're doing is to avoid difficult but important work, right? So I see entrepreneurs that will spend a lot of time building their website and getting their finances all set and getting their corporate structure and kind of doing marketing stuff. And they're spending all this time because what they're afraid of is going out and trying to sell a customer and getting told no.
I had a really great friend and mentor say once, be very careful where you get your dopamine, because Instagram can give it to you. LinkedIn can give it to
Yes.
you. And none of those are helping you actually close the next deal, build the next company, build the next
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
So you really have to guard that. And I think, like you said, it comes back to your priorities, but folks don't stop and actually do that exercise. So is there a way that you encourage folks basically to be mindful and stop and write out that big picture? Because without the end goal, they're never going to change kind of the hamster wheel that they've gotten themselves into.
Yeah, there's a couple of techniques that I've used over the years. One of them is a tool that I learned about from an author and writer named Michael Hyatt, who's also based here in the Nashville area. I'm sure you've heard of him. He wrote years ago about a tool called the Ideal Week, and it's a template for how you want your week to go and where certain types of activity should fit in your calendar. And the important thing about this is that it's a target. It's a model. It's not what you do perfectly every week. You never hit that ideal week, but it gives you a framework to say, this important work is going to happen during these hours on this day. And this other kind of work I'm going to put over on this day, specifically so that it doesn't get in the way of this very important work. And so sort of building a frame or a template of how you want your work to go will put some boundaries around things. So you can't fall into the trap of productive procrastination if Tuesdays are all about business development and that's all I do on Tuesdays, because it's biz dev day. And so I'm going to go out and work on finding clients. Or Wednesdays are all about working with my team and making sure that everybody knows what they're working on, and that I have those one-on-ones and do the team sessions. And so I don't allow things to overrun those very important tasks.
So Kris, I want to just briefly, because I've never experienced this myself, hear from you of what the actual bringing a book to life adventure was for you.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Well, it was a multi-year process in the sense that it started with an article that I wrote about 3 years ago on a website called Quora. It's a question and answer website. And somebody posed the question, what do entrepreneurs struggle with most? And so I wrote an answer about imposter syndrome and why I think entrepreneurs in particular are susceptible to imposter syndrome. And it's some of the reasons that we've talked about today. And, I've written a lot of articles and posts and things on different sites and published some things in newspapers and whatnot before. This article got almost 50,000 views. And for a really prolific writer, that may not be a whole lot, but for me, that was a big deal. And that was more than I had, more traction than I had gotten on almost anything I'd ever done before. So I really felt like I had struck a nerve. I had hit something that people cared about, that was resonating. And so I started talking with entrepreneurs and speaking at some conferences. I started talking about imposter syndrome, and I had people that would literally come up to me after a conference where I spoke about imposter syndrome and told a little of my story. And they would say, you changed my life today. That the reason I was here was to hear your speech. Thank you so much. And so clearly it was an impactful message and something that I felt like needed to be heard. And I looked for a book that was written to and about and for entrepreneurs and business leaders. And what I found was most of the work that's been done on imposter syndrome has been written specifically to women, because the early research on imposter syndrome, it was originally thought to only affect women, kind of a women in a man's world, feeling like a fraud. Back in the 70s when women were really just starting to enter corporate America and try to climb the ranks. But it didn't take long before, some genius figured out that men get insecure too, so and studies now show that it's not more prevalent among women. Women tend to be more honest about it, but it affects men and women equally. So a lot's been written about women. A lot's been written to college students and really young adults sort of entering the workforce. I couldn't find anything about entrepreneurship. And so the more I began to talk about it, the more I felt that not only was there a need, but I felt compelled to write this book. I felt like I had to at some point. And so it took a couple of years to get the ideas really together and make the decision that, okay, I'm going to write this book. And then once I committed, and once I signed with a publisher and I hired a writing coach, it was about a 9-month process from, the outline stage to a printed book in my hands, which, from what I've heard from other people who've written books and worked with publishers, that is a really aggressive schedule. It usually doesn't happen that fast. But as I said before, I had an incredible team around me, my publisher, my writing coach, and the people that were involved in the graphic design and everything to pull this together so quickly. It went really, really well.
And congrats on the recent launch.
Oh, thank you. I am so excited to finally see it in people's hands and start getting the feedback from people who are reading it and sharing with me how it's impacting their thinking and their life. It's been really great.
That's awesome. Now I have one last question to ask you, Kris.
Sure.
And that is, what is the core principle that you've lived by to help you be successful in business?
I think I'm going to go back to the idea that failure is not fatal, that failure is part of the process of success, and that you're never going to get anywhere if you're not willing to take a risk that puts you out there, that puts you at risk of being exposed as a failure, as a someone who makes mistakes or who does something wrong. You've got to be willing to do something wrong, and in fact, to be wrong. You've got to be willing to say, I messed that up, but I'm going to move on and I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it better the next time around, because every failure is a learning opportunity. So I think I'm a lifelong learner. I always want to be learning. And once I realize that failure is just a learning process, I don't fear failure anymore. I look for those opportunities to take risks, to try new things where I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to learn, and both are beneficial to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing.
You're so welcome, Rebecca. It's been fun talking with you today.
This was great. I so appreciate having you on the show. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Keep spreading the good news out there, and all the best on hopefully another book in the future.
We will see. We will see. Thank you.
Thanks, Kris.